Tonight, a feisty exchange overshadows a confidence vote in the Commons.
Monsieur Trudeau.
Monsieur Trudeau.
The raucous back and forth on the House floor.
We're used to casual homophobic comments.
Colleagues.
And a new ultimatum for the Liberals. Saskatchewan Mounties under scrutiny for a string of shooting deaths involving Indigenous people. Hurricane Helene churning on a precarious path towards Florida's Gulf Coast. Plus, driving home the idea of building a traffic tunnel below Canada's busiest highway.
We're getting this tunnel built.
And a historic hockey shrine.
It's a landmark, is what it is.
The fight to revive a rink near and dear to Nova Scotia.
It's a quintessential old barn. The stories it tells are immense.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. We begin tonight with the political showdown in Ottawa and the testy exchanges in the House of Commons. It came on the same day the minority Liberals survived a non-confidence vote, but received a new threat, an ultimatum, from one of the parties that helped prop them up. CTV's Rachel Aiello on the Bloc's demands and their deadline.
Tense moments in question period before a key vote. What started with a question from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre about the controversial purchase of a luxury condo in New York for Canada's Consul General quickly erupted. Heckling off camera included comments about the bathtub and the top bunk. Trudeau responded.
Don't worry, on this side of the House, we're used to casual homophobic comments from the other side of the House.
Shouting ensued. The mics in the chamber were muted.
I heard comments that because it was not on microphone, I chose not to get up.
The Speaker asked the Prime Minister to withdraw his comment.
Mr. Speaker, standing up to bullies requires us to call them out on their crap sometimes.
After more back and forth, Trudeau said this.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw the comment about defecating. I certainly... using the word crap, I shouldn't use that. I know crap is unparliamentary, but I will also, Mr. Speaker, when someone says something that is clearly homophobic, not them, I'm not accusing them of homophobia.
The Speaker has been asked to investigate. The Conservatives have been asked for comment.
Je déclare la motion rejetée.
All this before Poilievre's push to bring down the government failed.
He wants a climate change election. Let's have that election in the right time. Will he call it today?
The minority Liberals survived this test of confidence in the House of Commons with the support of the Bloc and the NDP. But before the vote even happened, Bloc leader Yves-François Blanchet issued an ultimatum, giving the government until the end of October to help enact a pair of Bloc bills about seniors' pensions and supply management, or risk an election before the new year.
There's not so much room for discussion.
Wasting no time, the Conservatives are set to serve up another non-confidence motion on Thursday, vowing they won't stop fighting until Canadians can go to the polls. While the drama has seized Parliament Hill, whether it could turn the dial on Canadians' desire for an election is another question.
You could see more votes starting to have an effect on Canadians where they're thinking more seriously about it. But the opposite side to that is there could be a tune-out factor.
With more high-stake votes ahead and political posturing only escalating, the Prime Minister's path to staying in power is looking precarious. Omar?
All right, Rachel, thank you. CTV's chief political correspondent Vassy Kapelos joins us now. Vassy, the Bloc's deadline, as we mentioned, is October 29th. And we know the minimum length of a federal election campaign has to be 36 days. So how likely is an election before Christmas?
Hi, Omar. Yeah, Rachel hit the nail on the head there. The Prime Minister's hold on power is more precarious today than it was yesterday. I've been speaking to someone very high up in the chain of command for the Bloc Quebecois to try and ascertain how serious are they about this ultimatum. And I've got to say, they are incredibly serious. They feel emboldened by what happened in Montreal, the win in the by-election there. They feel like they would actually be able at this juncture, forget about a couple months from now, up their seat count in Quebec, even talk of forming the official opposition. So I don't think there's going to be any hesitancy, to go forward if these demands are not met on the Bloc's part. At the same time, I've been talking to Liberals who seem unsure of whether they are willing to meet the Bloc's demands, particularly on old age security. They don't feel that there is a policy imperative to meet that demand. It's going to cost them a pretty penny. A lot of hesitance there, too. So I'd say overall, way more likely today than it was yesterday that we hit an election before the end of the year. Not for sure, but more likely.
All right, Vashi, appreciate the analysis. Thank you. Saskatchewan's police watchdog is investigating the death of a man killed in a shooting involving the RCMP, the third Indigenous person to die in an incident involving police in the province in less than a month. CTV's Alison Bamford on the reaction.
A police chase for a suspect believed to be armed and wanted by Mounties for a string of robberies came to a fatal close. RCMP say shots were fired, although unclear by who, leaving 34-year-old Joseph Desjardins from Fishing Lake First Nation dead. Yesterday's incident just one of 7 across Canada in the last month where an Indigenous person has died during a police interaction.
This is horrifying for First Nations, but if we're in distress or we need support, can we even trust to call the police?
5 fatal shootings involving police happening in Saskatchewan, Alberta, Ontario, and New Brunswick since the end of August. The youngest, a 15-year-old from Samson Cree Nation in Alberta, who initially called 911 for help. 2 others died after being hit by police cruisers in Winnipeg and northern Saskatchewan.
Since the creation of this country, the police haven't been kind to First Nations people. It needs an overhaul.
The RCMP's use of force now under scrutiny, facing calls from the Assembly of First Nations to address systemic racism and introduce stronger de-escalation tactics, crisis intervention teams, and funding for Indigenous policing.
Better to be policed by people who know you and understand you than to be policed by people who are brought in from the outside.
Thank you, Madam Last Speaker. Week, MPs held an emergency debate in Parliament to discuss the concerns.
We need to look at whether or not the RCMP are the right service to be responding in Indigenous communities.
The RCMP offers its sincerest condolences. Saskatchewan Mounties saying in part, serious injury or death is never the outcome they want to happen. Their comments limited, while these deaths are still under investigation by the RCMP watchdog. Omar?
All right, Alison, thank you. To the intensifying crisis in the Middle East now. Continuing Israeli strikes on Lebanon killed at least 72 more people today. And Hezbollah fired a missile aimed at Tel Aviv, its deepest strike yet. Also today, Israel's army chief said the military was preparing for a possible ground incursion. CTV's Heather Wright on the tensions and the Canadian response.
This is the moment an airstrike hit the Lebanese town of Jia. An explosion followed by a massive ball of fire. Israel says it has hit 2,000 Hezbollah targets in Lebanon in the last 3 days and is preparing for a possible ground assault.
We are scared, but we're steadfast at the same time.
Stephanie Muhaber is a Canadian who lives just outside of Beirut. She rejects Israel's assertion that its strikes are only going after Hezbollah targets.
All of these precision strikes and targeted strikes that are happening, they're not precise and they're not targeted. They are killing many women and children.
Lebanon's health ministry says at least 580 people have been killed since Monday, including nearly 150 women and children and 2 Canadians. Hundreds more have been injured, an estimated 90,000 displaced. Canadians are being urged to leave while they can. Some commercial flights are still available, and Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister is warning the situation will become more complicated if the airport closes.
Let's all remember that the difference between 2006 and now is that the port of Beirut exploded a couple of years ago. And that also complicates the way an evacuation could happen.
In Israel, 3 people were injured after Hezbollah launched dozens of rockets into the north today. The Iran-backed militant group also fired a missile at Tel Aviv. And while it was intercepted, it shows the group's capabilities. despite days of intense strikes.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister will meet with Lebanon's Prime Minister in New York on Saturday as world leaders look for a diplomatic solution. The United States is trying to broker some sort of ceasefire, hoping to stave off an even wider war. Omar.
All right, Heather, thanks. And late tonight, the United States issued a joint statement pushing for a 21-day ceasefire across the Lebanon-Israel border, a statement that also includes France and Canada. Tonight, the French president met the Prime Minister over what's being described as an informal dinner in Ottawa. A bus driver in Los Angeles is being praised for his quick thinking in a deadly hijacking that could have been even worse. A small army of squad cars tailed this bus for an hour, with the driver steering at gunpoint. The hijacker shot one passenger who later died, while sending others scrambling. Police say the driver remembered a life-saving technique, pressing a panic button to display a distress signal. Spike strips funneled the bus into a trap as the SWAT team swarmed in.
This is LAPD. It's surrounded. Come out with your hands up.
Storming in, saving the driver, and arresting the suspect. Evacuations are underway in Florida as Hurricane Helene inches closer to the state. It's expected to be a Category 4 when it makes landfall tomorrow evening, the most powerful storm to hit the U.S. in 2 years. Here's CTV's Joy Melvin.
It's already taken a swipe at parts of Mexico, lashing Cancun and barreling towards the U.S. Gulf Coast. Now a hurricane, Helene is moving and moving fast.
A mandatory evacuation has been ordered.
Heavy traffic as millions are on the move. Thousands of Floridians already forced to evacuate in low-lying areas. More than 60 counties under a state of emergency. Florida airports suspending flights. The governor warning residents.
You can hide from the wind, and there will be significant wind on this storm, but you got to run from the water. If you do have a major surge and you stay behind, that is potentially hazardous.
Satellite images show this storm is a massive, sprawling monster.
We are keeping a very close eye on this hurricane coming.
Canadians Dawn and Charlene McGilvery on a boating trip to Florida. Snowbirds forced to dock in South Carolina now to wait out the hurricane.
How bad are we going to be rocking? How loud are the winds going to be? And yeah, sleepless nights for sure.
We provisioned well, and like I said, fingers crossed, and we'll just wait it out here.
As residents batten down their homes, furiously filling sandbags, Florida's governor activated the National Guard and emergency workers, bracing now for a fearsome storm.
We will see unprecedented damage like nothing we have ever experienced before.
Even toughened Floridians used to riding out hurricanes say they've never seen one like this.
I'm stressed. I mean, they're calling for a possible 10-foot surge here.
President Joe Biden declared an emergency in Florida, so has Georgia and North Carolina. One insurance firm already estimating storm damage could be in the billions of dollars. Omar?
All right, Joy, thanks. And back in this country, the mother of a Canadian man killed in Peru says her son's murderer is in Quebec, averting authorities in plain sight. She says she's received no answers about whether extradition attempts are underway and has been told there is little police here can do. CTV's Quebec Bureau Chief Geneviève Beauchemin reports.
Pictures of the son Zian Labarre lost are all around. And adding to her grief now, she believes the man convicted of killing him in Peru lives just nearby as a free man. It's another shock after everything we've been through, she says. Her son, Jonathan Raymond, had moved to Peru and was running a cocoa and plantain farm. But in 2017, local media reported he disappeared, that 2 months later he was found dead, and that a friend and business partner, Canadian Philippe Truchon, was convicted of his killing and sentenced to 20 years in jail. But the victim's family says Truchon fled Peru while he was appealing his conviction. And Raymond's mother says Truchon is living with a childhood friend about 20 kilometers from her home. Today, no one answered the door at that address. Labarre has contacted police forces, Canadian officials pleading he be arrested. But legal experts say authorities here have no jurisdiction until Peru demands and is granted an extradition order.
But there's nothing the Canadians can do until
the other country says we want him.
It's not clear for now what steps Peru has taken. For now, Labar says she lives with the fear she may run into her son's killer. I don't know what I would do, she says. He once told me he loved him as a brother. We contacted Canadian officials and the RCMP, who say they can't comment because of privacy concerns, but also because this is a Peruvian investigation. The family of the victims say they hope that the Canadian Justice Minister could do something. Omar.
CTV's Genevieve Beauchemin, thank you. Coming up.
This proposal in particular will not solve the problem. It'll be hugely costly, and it'll just make congestion worse.
Pitching for green light to dig deep and fight traffic. Plus, the retro rink battling for its survival. Toronto has some of the worst traffic in the country, but now there's an ambitious proposal to ease the gridlock. CTV's Adrian Gobriel on the pitch.
Ontario's premier is promising to dig Canada's largest city out of its traffic woes.
I'll tell you one thing, we're getting this tunnel built.
The pitch is to bury an expressway for vehicles in transit under the country's busiest highway, Toronto's 401, which runs along the top of the city. The cost and timeline is now under review. If given the green light, it would become one of the largest infrastructure projects in Canadian history. The tunnel would run from the west end of the Greater Toronto Area to the east. The total proposed distance would be about 55 kilometers. By comparison, the longest tunnel road in the world is in Norway at 24.5 kilometers, and it's only 2 lanes.
This is not a serious proposal. This is not a serious premier.
I really think that this is a pipe dream of an idea.
So is Doug Ford's plan bold ambition, or is it a half-baked political pledge? Some commuters were skeptic on the streets today.
That's going to take a lifetime. That will never happen. Not in my lifetime.
Little faith.
Very little faith.
You laugh when you hear the idea.
I mean, it's a nice idea. I don't know how realistic it is.
The Toronto Tunnel would dwarf Boston's Big Dig, which took nearly a decade longer to build than originally forecast and ran approximately $10 billion over budget. While some planners shot down Ford's tunnel vision today,
it'll be hugely costly, and it'll just make congestion worse.
The director of the Urban Analytics Institute believes the Greater Toronto Area must think big, but at what cost?
It could be as much as $500 million a kilometer, and if you're building about 60 kilometers, that could be in the range of 30 billion or higher. The question is, do we have the money, and if the value we get out of it necessitates the use of this public funds?
A recent report listed Toronto as the most congested city in North America. Now, one expert who's in favor of the plan cautions that a tunnel won't reduce traffic. What it will do is increase throughput capacity for the province's skyrocketing population. Omar.
All right, Adrian, thanks. Still ahead, a pro hockey player stick handling having his car stolen. NHL star Claude Giroux is known for his speed and driving to the net, but yesterday he lost his wheels. The victim of a crime many Canadians are all too familiar with. CTV's Judy Trin reports.
Ottawa Senators forward Claude Giroux, known for his hot hands on the ice, is making headlines for his hot car. His Land Rover was stolen Tuesday night. Giroux's wife provided the play-by-play on social media, tracking the thief, actively driving. She complained of being unable to get a hold of police until the next morning and joked, maybe this will get me into labor. Ottawa police didn't comment, but Giroux's teammates see a marketing opportunity.
Maybe that's a topic. Let the fans pick which car you should buy next.
The top stolen vehicles in Canada are all high-end SUVs, and Range Rovers are the first-round pick. Giroux is the latest professional hockey player to lose his wheels.
Hi, I'm Sean Monahan.
This former Calgary Flames was traded to Montreal after being targeted.
My vehicle was actually stolen, and I was on the phone with my insurance company, and my agent kept giving me a call, and finally answered, and I found out the news.
Toronto Maple Leafs Mitch Marner had a much darker experience. 2 years ago, Marner was carjacked, forced to hand over the keys to his Range Rover at gunpoint.
What is driving auto theft? It's organized crime.
Stolen vehicles are the third largest source of funding for organized crime in Canada.
A record $1.5 billion in cars were stolen last year, but there is some improvement. After February's National Summit, the federal government announced more than $40 million to help border agents and police combat auto theft. So far this year, more than 1,200 vehicles have been recovered.
The Insurance Bureau of Canada is also calling on the federal government to pass legislation to force auto manufacturers to put in stronger anti-theft technology into their vehicles. Judy Trin, CTV News, Ottawa.
After the break, a close-knit community trying to save a piece of hockey history. In the town referred to as the birthplace of hockey, you will find a piece of history that dates back to the 19th century, a rink in Windsor, Nova Scotia that has stood the test of time, even as questions persist about its future. Here's CTV's Paul Hollingsworth.
Opening these doors allows you to step back in time to an era of rich hockey history.
It's a landmark is what it is.
The Stannis Street Rink opened in 1897 in a town that lays claim to being the birthplace of hockey.
It's a quintessential old barn. It's a word we like to use when we refer to hockey arenas in Canada, the old barn. This is a barn. The wood smells old, it feels old, but the stories it tells are immense.
It's the oldest indoor arena in Canada.
One of the big stories was the ice.
At the top of the steeple, there was a flagpole. If the flag was flying, it signaled it was cold, and the ice was hockey ready. No flag meant no hockey.
In a lot of games, had to be called because it got too slushy.
The last time hockey was played here was more than 60 years ago. The building is now used as a storage facility. There are questions about what the future holds for this old-time arena.
It's not been kept up very well, and to bring it up to standards now, going to take a lot of work.
The Windsor Hockey Heritage Society has a long-term vision for this old arena. They want to buy it from the current landlord and turn it into a hockey museum. Hockey historian Danny Dill says it would take a major community-based fundraising campaign for that dream to become a reality.
You could make it a nice hockey shrine, not only for here, but for the whole country.
It's an idea that is music to the ears for the CEO of the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame.
I'm really biased, but you find a way to save this and you find a way to preserve the history.
And celebrate the existence of the 127-year-old Stannis Street Rink. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Windsor, Nova Scotia.
A fascinating history. That's a snapshot of this Wednesday for all of us at CTV National News. Thank you for watching. Good night and see you tomorrow.